I have a question for you this morning. Of all the things that you have in your possession today, how much are they worth? Let me ask it this way. If I asked you today to give them up, would you? In our society, it's easy for us, Christians included, to get caught up in the accumulation of things. Time for a little honesty. I guess I found out I'm guilty of this myself. During one of our many moves from the state of Idaho back here to South Dakota, one of Janet's friends was carrying a lamp that at one time belonged to my grandmother. I remember telling Janet's friend, don't drop that. To which she replied, yes, I know the lamp belonged to your grandmother. But let's face it, this lamp won't bring her back. If I'm honest with you, Janet and I will tell you that the lamp itself is really kind of ugly. Many of you know my love for books, and I love to read all kinds of books besides the books for the ministry. I guess you could say I cherish these books. They represent an adventure for me that I can take right in the comfort of the parsonage. We own antiques, and they're not prize antiques, but they are things that mean something to me. I guess you could say that I treasured those antiques as well. Oftentimes I catch myself wondering about my priorities. Many of you know Harold Ambrose, who's a fellow pastor here in White River. He stopped by my office earlier this fall, shortly after Boise State had beaten Florida. And he discussed one of my favorite topics, the Boise State Broncos. He made mention of my replica helmet in my office, and then he got me to question my priorities. He said, maybe, Pastor Jason, you need to reorganize your priorities. A point that I thought I had well under control until he pointed it out. Relationships are the most important things in our world. And I cherish my relationship. Next to the relationship with my wife, the only relationship I cherish more is my relationship with Jesus Christ. So that's the question we're going to deal with today. How precious are our treasures? And if they are precious, are we, as Christians, willing to give them up for the kingdom of God? We live in a society that puts store in stuff for things. We have to deal then with a difficult question. We'll begin by looking at a parable that Jesus told to communicate a lesson to his audience. Today, that parable of the valuable pearl. As we go through this, I hope that you and I will take inventory of those things in our lives, that stuff that we have, and say to ourselves, am I willing to give all of this up for the kingdom of God? Now, if you're saying to me, well, Pastor, I won't be talking to you after church because I'm not willing to do that, don't feel bad. It just means, like myself, we have some work to do. I think this is a good place for me as your pastor to remind you once again of John Wesley's quote. We're going on to perfection in heaven, that we have not achieved perfection here on earth, nor will we ever here on earth. I invite you now to sit back, join me as we explore this parable of the valuable pearl, and then apply these lessons, or this lesson, to our lives. As Christians, we should be able to give up everything we have in order to gain the truth of the kingdom of heaven. This parable of the pearl is found in the Gospel of Matthew, and only in Matthew's Gospel. It's in the 13th chapter, and it covers verses 45 and 46. But these two passages carry a lot of weight. This parable, like the one just prior, basically teach the same truth. You see, the kingdom is of such great value that we as Christians should be willing to give up everything we have in order to gain the kingdom of God. A word of caution. Understand, Jesus is not implying in any sort of way that we can purchase our way into the kingdom with money or good deeds. The Apostle Paul, when he wrote to the church at Ephesus, in chapter 2, verses 8 and 9, he said, "For it is by grace that that we have been saved through faith. See, it's not of ourselves. It's not anything we did or gave up. It's a gift from God. Not by works so that you and I can boast, Paul said. We look at the Gospel of Luke, chapter 18, verse 22. When Jesus heard this, he said to them, "You still lack one thing. Sell everything you have, give it to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven." Then he said, "Come and follow me." See, at the time period we're talking about, pearls would have had a special place in the hearts of men. People at this time desired to possess these lovely pearls, not just for their monetary value, but simply because they were a beautiful article. People of the time found pleasures in simply handling and contemplating the pearl. The main source of pearls in those days would have been the Red Sea. As we look at this parable, there are a couple of suggested truths. The first one says, to find the kingdom of heaven is like comparing the kingdom of heaven to a pearl. The pearl to ancient people was the loveliest of all possessions, meaning that the kingdom of heaven is the loveliest thing throughout the world. Your second suggested truth this morning, to be in the kingdom of God, is to accept and do the will of God. This is seen, or should be seen, as a lovely thing. Beauty of life is to just simply accept God's will. There are other pearls in the world, but only one pearl, this pearl of the kingdom, has such a great price. We can find loveliness in the pearl in the world, but the supreme beauty lies in the acceptance of the will of God for our lives. Our third suggested truth this morning is that the man who is digging in the field was not searching for treasure. It simply came to him unaware. You see, the man searching for the pearl will spend his entire life simply in the search. We discover the result of a moment or the result of a lifetime search, the reaction is the same. Everything had to be sold to sacrifice the gain and gain this one precious thing. We all have the same truth. If a man discovers the will of God for himself, whether it's a burst of life or a burst of light or at the end of his long journey, it's worth everything if we'll just accept it. Remember from last week, we discussed at different points where different stages in life where that person might find God. So there you go. That's the parable of the pearl from the front side. Now let's take a look at it from the back side. As I searched commentary, some say that, think of it like this. Jesus is the salesman of his time. And his sales pitch is simply repent. Now, from someone who has a degree in marketing and over 20 years of sales, I'm guessing that sales pitch isn't going to be very effective. Jesus explained that there's a price for our salvation. For you and I to get to heaven, there's a price. And he says it's an ugly one. The product Jesus offers is the kingdom of God. And we need to see that a big price has been paid, but to you and I, it may seem insignificant. When Jesus spoke to his original audience, he said, the kingdom of heaven is very near. We can't wait. We should be expecting it to come. That statement, of course, created curiosity in the original audience. And people who heard this asked questions. They wanted details. Explain that to us, Christ. So to answer the question, Jesus did what he often did. He told a parable. Remembering that the pearl is a valuable jewel of the time, the audience that he spoke to would have known the difference between an average pearl, a superb pearl, or the difference between good and, say, a perfect pearl. Jesus describes such a person. He's the merchant, which is hard for us to see. But Jesus knows his audience. He knows his customer, and he knows his territory. As a person searches passionately for the right pearl, and then one day, they find it. They examine the pearl over and over, and then the person leaves the pearl in the shop, only to return later. See, he doesn't negotiate the price, but he knows that the cash he has on hand is not enough. That person then is faced with the difficult decision: do I sell my other pearls to get it? As Christians, we need to see the kingdom of heaven in the same way as that valuable pearl. And you and I should be willing to sell everything in order to get it. Some of those on this journey with us will say, that's nice, but the price is just simply too high. See, Jesus never told of the benefit or why someone would pay such a price. He didn't try to prove, as we often do today, the kingdom's worth. So the question that you and I are left with is, was the people of that time, were they better at reaching people than we are? See, today we don't talk about the kingdom of God. We talk about the promise that Christ made for people to escape hell. Now you might say, this sounds like risky business, this cross thing you're talking about. Well, guess what? God risked everything, His one and only Son, in hopes that we, as His followers, would take a risk in return and have a relationship with Him. Here's where it gets dicey. In a world full of self-centeredness, self-satisfaction, and self-seeking human beings, God risked everything. All for the chance that we would have a relationship with Him, that we would return His love back to Him. God took the risk because He thought we were worth it. Jesus said the pearl came at a great price. Maybe now it's easier for us to understand that we must sell everything, give up everything we have to get it. It's a huge risk, and still when you consider that God risked everything for us, it's not really that high a price to pay for eternity. We remember that heaven is still yet to come. It is not in this world. Great stories. How do I apply it to my life? I want all of us to take some time again. Think about those prized possessions, those things that we cherish so much. Remembering that we cannot take those things out of this world and into heaven with us. We're not King Tut. We're really only entrusted, and this comes from one of my favorite lines, we're really only entrusted with the things of this world for a short period of time. You see, you and I are given the privilege of holding these things in trust for just a little while, and then when we pass, when we go on to perfection in eternity with God, we pass on those things to the next generation. Odds are the next generation will probably say, what on earth were mother and father holding on to this crazy thing for? Things don't ensure our salvation. After this, I think I'm able to let go of the things in my life. They're not more valuable than my salvation. This is a concept that makes a lot of us uncomfortable. We live in a society that says we define who we are by what we have and how much money I make. Who cares? Who really cares? That's just the opinion of our fellow man. That opinion is by no means as important as the opinion of God. That's the one that matters for my salvation. So what pearls do we have in possession that we're willing to give up that would make the difference for our salvation? For all of us, and for me included, the true reward should be salvation in heaven for all eternity. I'd like to mention that I give up the things I have in my possession for a chance. I would give up everything I have in my possession for a chance to witness the moment in someone's life where they accept Jesus Christ and they build on their personal relationship with Him and Him alone. You see, there's nothing that I own that is worth that much to me. Not even my Boise State helmet. And you can tell Harold Ambrose has said that. See, I want you to understand this is a difficult concept for people of our generation. Give up everything we hold so dear? process will take some time and some learning on our part. Is it a priority shift? Yeah, I think so. But we're talking about eternity and our salvation, and let me ask you, is there any price that can be paid or put on that? Think for a moment about all the things we own. Think of the thing that means the absolute most to you. Is that worth your eternal salvation? How popular, when you leave this place, you go into your place of work or into society tomorrow and the next day, and you run into your coworker, you run into your friend, and you say, yeah, I don't own that anymore. You see, I gave that up for salvation in heaven with God. How popular are you going to be? Where are our priorities? You see, I assumed, and that gets everyone in trouble, but I assumed that my priorities were in order until Harold Ambrose came to call on me that day in my office. Don't get me wrong. Even after last night, I still love my Boise State Broncos, but not enough to hold on to them in exchange for my salvation. You see, God knew the price was high. He gave His one and only Son to save the world that seems so thankless for such a great sacrifice. If God, the Father of the universe, is willing to give up all of that for us, for a relationship with Him, then shouldn't we, as His followers, be willing to make that kind of sacrifice for a relationship with Him as well? I encourage all of you to remember that we're in this together, that we'll need each other to make this advancement in the relationship, in our relationship with Jesus Christ. We'll need to work together and pick each other up when we fall. I remind you that it is called the practice of Christianity, not the science of Christianity. The trick is that we need to keep trying to sacrifice the pearls in our lives for that relationship with God through Jesus Christ. Are we up to the challenge?